Get us started with our first movie here, Eric.
You're actually first on the list, Luke.
Oh, crap. Let's... Alright, we're going to be talking about Fairytale today. Based on the Italian stage play by Filippo Timmi, this is the feature debut of Sebastiano Mori, who is also Timmi's life partner. Just with that quick little introduction there, you can tell that this is an intimate production for both of them, and luckily it's an intimate production for most of the cast as well, as most of them have been plucked straight from the stage production and put right in front of the camera. They all carried over. And, I probably don't have to tell you this, given that, I just recently discovered you're a fan of musicals as well. But in my eyes, plays that are adapted for the big screen are at their best, or at the very least enhanced, when the stars are, when the stars carry over from the stage, Right. You got I had to look up a few examples. So Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl. I knew Robert Preston in The Music Man, Samantha Barks in Les Mis, and, to a lesser extreme, Colm Wilkinson, who was the original Jean Valjean, and then played, a cameo appearance as the bishop at the start of the film. Mm-hmm. Whether it's because of the experience the actors already have or the relationship they've already developed with the material, the product always feels informed by their presence. It's easier because, I feel like there's a lot of skepticism whenever a movie is made about, an adaptation of some kind where, the product isn't necessarily original. You know what I mean? It just feels authoritative when somebody has made the leap. It helps ease the transition in my mind. And the same can be here. Obviously I didn't go to Italy to watch this stage play, but you can, when you're watching the movie, you can tell that everybody is very comfortable with what they're doing, and especially Timmi. So he plays the title character, Mrs. Fairytale. She's a perfect American housewife without hardly any cares in the world of her own. Her days consist of brewing hard teas, and I mean hard whiskey teas, right. Losing track of her stuffed poodle, Lady, and interacting with whichever one of her neighbors drops by to bring Lady home. So the first third, or maybe it runs about 90 minutes, a little bit less than 90 minutes. The first third of that, or maybe even half, consists of these episodic encounters. We meet the neighbor, or her neighbor, and her best friend, Mrs. Emerald, who was also another star from the show. There's plumbers and salsa dancer instructors. There's a lot of interesting things going on here, and they're all entertaining enough. But the movie really kicks into high gear once Mrs. Fairytale comes to realize that the comforts of her home and her life are unsatisfying. And it's important to mention, and it's distinctly unsatisfying, specifically, underneath her skirt kind of thing. And it's important to mention that this revelation is brought on by the interference of UFOs, of all things. I found this to be an incredibly fresh satire. If you couldn't tell, it's over the top, sometimes too much so. I'll talk about that in a bit. But this was sent to me, pitched as an ode to the 1950s. So this takes place in 1950s, and this, I feel like it's cliche sort of to say that the setting is a character in and of itself, but this house, the film takes place, almost exclusively in this house. Mrs. Fairytale doesn't go farther than her front porch, which feeds into this idea of domestic servitude and, being a slave to chores and, that's your purpose. And it's obviously the idea of having a transgender, like this is this is seriously a transgender riff on the American housewife archetype, right? The UFOs literally zap a penis onto her. Like, this is what happens. And it's a funny reveal in how it all happens, but she decides, it's like, okay, like, that's what, when that happens, she discovers, like, she's unsatisfied with her life, and with Mrs. Emerald, they're going to find a way to escape her husband, who we find out is very abusive, who actually, like, it's not even like you find out. It's like she very casually says, like, oh, he beats me every day. And she's just fine with it. The set, the house is decorated and the characters are decorated in the style of the typical Hollywood portrayal of the 1950s, something you would see on, like, the Dick Van Dyke Show or I Love Lucy or even Happy Days, even though Happy Days was a lot more centered on the kids than it was the adults. Though, like, once Ron Howard leaves, it becomes more focused on Mr. and Mrs. C, whatever. Sorry, I like Happy Days a lot. I could talk about that forever. But, like, it's a little alarming, because, like, it's not, alarming is the wrong word. I think that this set, this very recognizable era, speaking of which, I started playing Fallout 4, right? And it's the same kind of 50s, the same sort of 50s architecture, like the tranquil suburban homes and, copy and paste lifestyle between all the houses in the neighborhood. Have I painted a picture? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay, cool. I think that's the perfect way to explore the fear, the curiosity, the animosity that goes into sexual identity of this period. Because, like, you think about it, it's like the 60s is sort of the point of social revolution in America, right? With the civil rights movement, you have the women's movement, or, the women's movement obviously, like, started in the 20s, but was starting to, was rapidly growing at this point. We start getting gay rights movements. But, all of these things were not necessarily, when we think about decades, like, I don't know if you ever had to do projects in high school where, like, you focused on, like, a decade, like, I feel like when people did 50s, they were not focused on the social revolutions of the time. So to have a transgender, or at least a transvestite woman as the American housewife, a very familiar, very comforting symbol of distinct period in American history, it's unique. I hate describing things as unique because it just sounds so, ununique, I guess.
Right.
But it's fresh and it's intelligent above all things, and the house feeds into this as well. She has sniper rifles in the umbrella stand, right? She opens the door to one guy, picks up the rifle, screams, "I'm not a communist." It's just like these are so exploitative. These are exploitative examples of, the fear and, ultimately the violence that was, like, it's shadowed in pop culture representations of the era, but it was certainly there, and this movie explores that to an extreme level. Gosh, I'm forgetting all my words. And, like, what's great about any satire, especially if they're based in the past, is how you can relate them to today. And that house really does its job in allowing us to relate those violent circumstances to what's going on in the world today. And, you know, we remember that in some places in America there are still snipers and umbrella stands, and Mrs. Fairytale is still trying to find her freedom, you know,
Right.
Things like that. I thought this was very intelligent. I really did. I thought it was funny. Lots of laughs. You know how when we watch an anime or something, and you know the music kind of seems like it hits it right on the nose. Like it's just like the lyrics are just like really on the nose. Like it's not really a critique. It's just like the English language songs that are in this film are really right on the nose about the themes. And I'm just mentioning it because like it obviously isn't that important to the basis of the film itself. But yeah, I really like this. It did go over the top sometimes. There was a strain. It was too over the top at times. You know, the performances are obviously very eccentric, especially Mrs. Fairytale and even Mrs. Emerald at times. But sometimes, like, the film has this weird editing style. I even looked back on it to see if it was maybe like my screener was messed up, but no. It was, when I wrote a written review of it, I called it moment scorching, in the sense that, you know, one shot has Mrs. Fairytale like walking up to a table, right? And without us seeing her go into the, like, sit down at the table, in a moment, in a flash, she's sitting at the table.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just a weird editing pattern. And it just creates like I don't think it was on purpose. Like, I don't know, because obviously they couldn't have done that on stage. I just don't know what purpose that served. But you know, it wasn't enough to detract from my overall enjoyment of the film. This was very funny. I liked it a lot. Great story. You know, it doesn't take long to figure out what exactly the fairy tale is here, and you know, this is definitely one worth checking out. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars.